On this edition of the Newsmakers, testing times for testing ties. Following the latest angry exchange with the EU, we ask if Turkey should give up on joining the bloc. Also on today's program, a second chance for peace. Colombia's president agrees a new deal with Farc rebels a month after voters shot down his original peace proposal. And in picture, this firefighters tried to bring Israel's wildfires under control after a week in which tens of thousands have had to flee their homes. Hello and welcome to the Newsmakers with me, Imran Garda. Earlier this year, the European Union agreed a deal with Turkey to limit the number of refugees making the dangerous sea crossing to Greece. In return, the EU promised visa-free travel for Turks, billions of dollars in aid for the refugees, and accelerated EU membership talks. But since that deal was made, relations have deteriorated sharply. Europe says Turkey's anti-terror laws are incompatible with its values. And in the wake of the failed coup, the European Parliament held a symbolic vote to freeze membership talks. Now, the Turkish President Recep Tayyip Erdogan has warned he'll open the borders to refugees once more unless Europe changes its position. Our newsmaker today is Turkey, as we ask whether it's still on track for EU membership or whether it's time to maybe take another path.
If the accession process came to an end, I believe we would both find ourselves in a lose-lose scenario.
But that thinking didn't stop members of the European Parliament from voting overwhelmingly in favor of freezing talks on Turkey's EU membership. The vote was non-binding, but highly symbolic. In the past, the EU has seen Turkey as a strategic partner for the bloc and as a key player in Europe's efforts to curb the influx of refugees. But things took a different turn following the coup attempt in Turkey back in July. The EU accused Turkey for violating the basic rights of its opponents during the investigation into the failed coup. Turkey felt Europe failed to stand by it in its hour of need. EU Minister Ömer Çelik criticized Europe on Twitter. Ever since the 1950s, Turkey has tried to join the EU, but it's not been plain sailing. The country first applied when the bloc was known as the Economic Community. Its name has changed, but attitude towards Turkey stayed the same. Turkey officially applied to become an EU member in 1987. It had to wait almost 2 decades for the accession talks to even begin, which they finally did in 2005. 11 years later, it still isn't an EU member. Turkey's Minister of European Affairs, Ömer Çelik, blamed the vote to suspend accession talks on the rise of the European right.
Tüm Avrupa'yı aşırı sağ ve yabancı düşmanlığı kuşatırken bunlara ses çıkarmayan, hatta bunlarla rekabete giren siyasi gruplar bugün Türkiye'ye mesaj vermeye kalkıyorlar.
There is now concern that the EU position could affect the refugee deal agreed in March, whereby steps were made to reduce the flow of refugees into Europe. In exchange, Turkey was promised economic aid and visa-free travel to Turkish citizens within the Schengen zone. Of the $3.2 billion it was promised in aid over the past year, only $288 million has been delivered, and visa-free travel all but scrapped.
Kapıkule'ye 50.000 mülteci dayandığı zaman feryat ettiniz. Acaba Türkiye sınır kapılarını açarsa ne yaparız demeye başladınız. Bana bak, eğer daha ileri giderseniz bu sınır kapıları da açılır, bunu da bilesiniz.
More than 1.3 million people arrived in Europe last year, triggering bitter disputes between EU member states over how to handle them. Although Turkey and the EU have flirted with a possible relationship for more than 50 years, is that now all but over? Christine Pirvolakis, The Newsmakers.
Well, joining me now from Brussels is Turkey's ambassador to the European Union, Selim Yenel. Ambassador Yenel, a pleasure to talk to you. Thank you very much for joining us. Let's start by talking about that vote in the European Parliament. It was non-binding, yes, But those 479 who voted in favor of suspending ties with Turkey, they were trying to send a message to Ankara. How did you receive that message? To you, what was their message?
Well, I mean, yes, it is a non-binding resolution and it is political. But if you look at the last 7 or 8 resolutions on Turkey, they've always been negative. I mean, the European Parliament has unfortunately been prejudicial, has preconceived ideas, and especially the last one, we see that they did not show any empathy towards Turkey. We went through a traumatic experience with the coup, the possible coup that was envisaged on the 15th of July. It was quite unfortunate, but most unfortunate was that the European Union did not show any understanding about what we have gone through. And without trying to understand, they have now passed this resolution on Turkey. And it's all stick. What do they expect from this? How do they want to continue the relationship? This is quite unfortunate. But one thing is good, is that they don't speak about on behalf of the EU. The Council and the Commission speaks on behalf of the EU, and those are the 2 institutions that we take more seriously.
I want to ask you, you're in Brussels, you break bread with a lot of these members, these MEPs and so on. You know them, you socialize with them. In a nutshell, do they want you in or do they want you out?
Well, I mean, it's very difficult to answer that because we have about 751 members of parliament, and they vary from the extreme right to the extreme left, to the liberals, to the Democrats, the Christian Democrats, the socialists. So it's a very different group. So it's very hard to pinpoint if they want us or not. A lot of people don't want us. A lot of people do want us. It's a mixed picture, but unfortunately those who don't want us are in the majority.
When President Erdogan said, we are the ones who feed 3 million to 3.5 million refugees in this country, you have betrayed your promises. If you go any further, those border gates will be opened. Would you understand why some of the Europeans would feel threatened and almost blackmailed by that language?
Well, right now the EU has promised us many things. They promised us a lot of, let's say, developments in our relationship. Last year when we had the migration crisis, we thought that would be an opportunity to come back together after so many years. But they have failed to fulfill all these promises. So the president feels that he has been left behind, left alone. We have not been invited to summits. We have been promised some financial contributions for the Syrians. That has come very, very late. The chapters, the accession process has been going very slow, if not at all. And the visa liberalization process, we believe that we have delivered, but the EU is now creating some new obstacles. But we still believe that we have a chance for a dialogue. We haven't cut that off. The EU minister will be here tonight and he'll have talks with his counterparts here in town. So we believe that despite everything, despite the high-level rhetoric, we will still continue to have a dialogue because it's in the interest of both sides.
How much of this is down to, really, as you mentioned, more than 700 members, the fact that their opinions differ, how much of this is down to the bureaucracy and the different opinions rather than the European Union deliberately stonewalling on these issues and actively betraying Turkey?
No, again, I mean, when we're talking about the European Union, there are the institutions, there are the member states. So, I mean, it's very difficult to pinpoint who is on our side and who isn't. It changes from government to government. Sometimes, when we saw Germany were on our side, France was on our side, and then France switched sides when Mr. Sarkozy was president. Things change. I mean, the stars all have to be aligned to make it function. Despite this, we have a good communication with the Commission. We have good communication with certain member states, even within member states. So I think that despite everything, and despite the fact that we've had a roller coaster of a ride since the last 50 years, we'll still make some progress in the coming days and years.
As the ambassador to the European Union, you're well placed to gauge the temperature, the political temperature going on within the European Union right now. We've had Brexit. We see countries like Austria in which a far-right candidate is, leading the polls when we come to a presidential rerun. Talking about the zeitgeist, do you believe that Europe is taking on a sort of nationalist feeling right now? The temperature is very nationalist, and that's a very different Europe that Turkey, to the one that Turkey had wanted to join many years ago?
Well, I mean, if you look back 10 years ago when we finally became not only candidates but opened negotiations, the situation was much different. We had different leaders in the EU as well. Things have changed, yes, but that doesn't mean that won't change again. We'll see new elections next year, and hopefully the elections in Austria will be not to the far right, but more to the center. So the jury is still out. We do hope that the European Union, the people, the public opinion will make the right choices. We are aware that it's not a uniform institution, it's not a uniform entity. Things will change, so let's not judge or prejudge the situation with the existing situation. Things will change, and they will change for the better. I'm sure of that.
I wonder who needs whom more?
Excuse me?
Who needs whom more, the Turkey or the European Union, as things stand?
We need each other. There's not more or here like that. We need each other. We have benefited from it, from the customs union to all negotiations, with the relationship we have together on foreign policy. We benefit, and we will suffer both if we don't have a good dialogue. So there is not one side that benefits more. Both sides benefit from it.
Reading some of the European papers, there seems to be a bit of anxiety that Turkey is turning east instead of west. They're pegging it to the news that Turkey might join the Shanghai Cooperation Organization. Do you understand that European anxiety?
Well, they're not mutually exclusive. I mean, you can be part of the Shanghai group and still try to become have accession to the European Union. We are a NATO member. We're part of the OECD, the Council of Europe. We are opening ourselves to more horizons. We believe that our foreign policy is more inclusive and diversified. When we were talking about Turkey in the past, this was the Cold War era in which you had to choose sides. Since then, Turkish foreign policy has become much more diversified, and this will continue. We've opened up to Africa, to Asia, to Latin America. So, as I said, it's not mutually exclusive. You can be part of everything and still join the EU.
Last week, I was looking at some photographs that came through from Brussels. It was of a march where you had HDP MPs leading marches where people were waving PKK flags right in the seat of the European Union in Brussels. And of course, many in Turkey were upset by seeing those images. Do you think that they allow this sort of thing out of ignorance or to deliberately antagonize Turkey?
I don't think it's deliberate, but maybe out of ignorance, because what we're seeing is basically lip service. The European Union has said that PKK is a terrorist organization. They've said it many times. We've seen it from member states, but they don't act upon it. We've seen terrorists go around freely, even in the European Parliament. They can act freely, walk around. But, I mean, if they're going to be more than lip service, then they should take action. And that's the time in which Turkey will begin to trust the EU again. Because for us, it's an existential issue. We are fighting against terrorism. We've been doing it for years and years, but we haven't got the support that we need or we want from the EU so far.
Polls are hard to come by within the country here. There aren't many, but from the few that I have read, published in Hurriyet, there was a poll that shows that the belief and support for Turkey's EU membership amongst Turkish citizens is at around 30%. That's quite low. And another poll as well says some 75% of Turks believe that Turkey is drifting away from the European Union. What do you make of that, sir?
Well, I mean, public opinion can change very quickly. If the EU had different policies towards Turkey, if they said that we need you, we want you to become members, then it would have been a different situation. But so far, we've been seeing that we are being pushed away. We've seen the policies of certain countries towards Turkey. We've seen the rhetoric. And of course, people take it very, very personally. Why do we want to join an entity which wants us away? So if you ask the people, do you want to become members? They would say yes. But if you ask them, do you believe it will happen? They'll say no. It all depends on how the situation is taken care of on both sides. We have to explain to our people that EU membership is a good thing, but the EU also has to say that we want you. And we're not hearing that, unfortunately. We want to be members. We want to be part of this entity. We are a Western country, but the EU has to see us in the same light. They don't, and therefore there's a lot of dismay in our public opinion.
Fascinating times. Ambassador Selim Yenel, it's been a pleasure having you on the program. Thank you very much for taking the time to talk to us. Still to come in the Newsmakers, Colombia's president makes peace with the Farc again, despite opposition from the public. And in picture this, tens of thousands of people prepared to return home as the Haifa wildfire is brought under control. Colombia's government has signed a peace deal with Farc rebels for the second time this year. The first deal brought a formal end to Latin America's longest-running conflict, but it was rejected by voters in a referendum. A month later, a revised deal has been signed. President Santos says it takes into account most of the public's worries, but, as the Newsmakers' Yvette McCullough reports, he won't put it to another public vote.
A second chance to make historic peace. After more than 50 years of war and more than 220,000 lives lost, Colombia's government and the Farc have signed a peace deal. Again.
We have managed to put an end to the armed conflict with the Farc and lay the foundations for the construction of stable and lasting peace.
With this agreement, we're not abandoning our ideological, political and moral positions, but we are ending the war so we can confront our contradictions in a civilized way.
The two sides signed the first deal in September. It was put to the people in a referendum, and Colombians rejected it by 50.2%. The results caused shock and disbelief for nearly half the country. But for the other half, it was cause for celebration. A chance to negotiate a better, less lenient deal. Peace, but with retribution. Just a few days later, Colombia's president was awarded the Nobel Peace Prize. He vowed to continue negotiations with the Farc. Now a deal has been signed, but this time, the people won't get a say. Around 50 changes have been made to the original peace deal, including requiring Farc rebels to declare all their assets, with the money to be used as reparation for victims. They must also give exhaustive and detailed information about all involvement in drug trafficking, and judges will be allowed more flexibility in drug trafficking cases. The new deal also gives greater protection to rural landowners and bans rebels from running in certain congressional districts and post-conflict zones. But for many, these changes still don't go far enough. Rebels will still automatically get 10 seats in Congress and will still be able to avoid jail. The new deal will be put to Congress, where the government has a majority. Opponents say the decision should again have been put to Colombians.
The Congress is an expression of the people, is the representative expression, but here it's about an instrument of participatory democracy.
But President Santos says there is too much at stake, and Colombia needs to act now, or risk losing its hard-fought-for chance of peace. Does Colombia's New Deal go far enough in listening to the will of its people? And should Colombians have been given the opportunity to decide that for themselves? Yvette McCullough, The Newsmakers.
Well, joining me now from Bogota is Paloma Valencia, a senator from the Democratic Center Party. Senator Valencia, good to talk to you once again. The last time I had you on the program, it was around about the time of the referendum. You were against the peace deal. You were urging people to vote no. They did that. This time, the president and the Farc have ignored the voters and they've just gone ahead with the peace deal. How do you feel about that?
We feel very disappointed because we were waiting for having a real national agreement so that the peace agreement was something that can be durable and suitable for the future of Colombia. But President Santos decided it was better to do it his way and just avoid the voice of half of the country. So we are very worried that they promise us that the last word of this agreement will be in hands of all the Colombian people, and now they are just taking us away from the discussion and just imposing this agreement, which is an agreement that Colombians do not want.
So they say that the new deal, the revised deal, has clearer protections for the countryside landowners. There'll be a greater presence of the government there in those rural areas. It'll be tighter and tougher on drug trafficking and so on. But is the biggest problem for you still the fact that you might have to sit next to former Farc rebels or killers in parliament?
Well, the thing is not about Farc having political representation. We don't have problems with that. We are against that those who committed crimes against humanity will not have to pay jail and will have the opportunity to go into politics without any vote, without needing votes. So we feel this is a bad example. Colombia has more than 3,500 rebel bands, illegal bands, criminal bands, who are looking forward to see what Farc gets, because they think if they get big enough and powerful enough, they will get the same. So for Colombia, we think it's very dangerous to allow people that committed crimes against humanity just to walk out as nothing happened.
Are you going to give it a chance, or are you going to try to stop the deal?
We're going to try to stop the deal, because this isn't a thing of chances. This is an international agreement in which everybody has been has agreed that some crimes, like crimes against humanity, are against the will of the people, are against what you should accept in a society. So we will still fight for that. And we feel that the transitional justice, what is called the special peace justice, is a very threatening thing for Colombia, because Farc will get an amnesty for all their men, and then they will have, like, I don't know, 1,000 cases of abuses with criminals that were committed crimes against humanity, but there will be 70 years of persecution against military, police, armed forces, and the Colombian civils. So we think this is a very threatening point also.
Their top rebel commander, Timoshenko, Rodrigo Londoño, at the signing, asked the Colombian people for forgiveness. He said, "Forgive us for our crimes." Will you ever forgive him?
I think it isn't a matter of forgiveness. I can forgive him, and all the Colombians can forgive him. But it's about what the government, what the law should do with people that committed those kind of crimes. We're talking about 11,000 children who were recruited. We are talking about more than 6,000 women who were violated. We're talking about more than 30,000 kidnappings, killings, attacks over the towns. They killed children because they were dressed as policemen. So you cannot just say that that's okay and they just can walk away with all these crimes and nothing happened and everything will be better, because it won't. All the other criminals will feel that they have the same right to do the same things and kill a lot of people.
Yeah, but I mean, not all the other criminals were involved in a more than 50-year-long civil war with the government. At what point do we have to say, okay, it's been more than half a century, rather a bad deal, but a deal nonetheless than no deal? Are you sympathetic to that argument at all?
I don't think Colombia has a civil war, because when you have a civil war, you have half of the country one side and half of the other one. What we have was a terrorist attack over the Colombian institutions. Farc became important in violence not 50 years ago, some 20 years ago, when they owned the illegal crops of cocaine. They became one of the largest cartels in the world and the biggest in Colombia. That's where they became a real threat for Colombia. Colombia didn't have a dictatorship. It didn't have all the things that would justify an army. It was just a business, an illegal business based on cocaine, based on kidnapping, and based on illegal mining. So for us, it's very difficult to admit that there was a civil war, because Farc do not have support in Colombian people.
Senator, always excellent to have you on the program. Thank you very much for joining us, Senator Paloma Valencia. In today's Picture This, firefighters in Israel have finally contained a forest fire. For more than a week, the blaze spread through the country's north, causing tens of thousands to flee. Let's take a look. You've been watching this edition of the Newsmakers with me, Imran Garda. Thank you for watching. See you tomorrow. Bye-bye.